One of the toughest things that can happen is not just you going through your own personal grief, but it's you watching someone that you love go through grief because you cannot help get rid of that pain immediately. Something that's happening on in my personal life and the life of one of my clients is that we both had in-laws, right? So for me, it's my father-in-law. For my client, it's his mother-in-law. We have both lost someone that our spouses love dearly. And one of the toughest things about it is seeing them go through the grief while also processing your own. And what I want to do in this podcast is I want to help you to be able to help someone else go through their grief, because the thing is that grief has an immense amount of pain, and there's so many different ways that someone can go about trying to solve it, but we need to know what are the best ways to solve that pain. And in this podcast, that's what we're going to talk about. Now, my goal here is not to try to make something like grief magically go away overnight. And that honestly is the biggest thing that keeps people locked away in their grief. They think, well, once I go to therapy, once I take this medication, once I pray, all this grief will just go away overnight. And it doesn't work like that. Grief is something that you're going to have to learn how to hold for the rest of your life. But at the end of the day, it doesn't have to be all of your life. And that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today. Now, something that you guys may know is that grief has its own process, right? The 6 stages of grief or 5 stages of grief, like we know that. But when it comes to the person that you're dealing with, they may bounce around those stages, and they may even find themselves stuck in one stage a lot longer than normal. And that part, ironically, is normal. And again, we want to be able to take our time and help these people, help these loved ones go through that. And that's what this podcast is going to be about. Now, if you're new to the show, what I want to tell you is that the purpose of this podcast is to help you guys to see what happens in actual therapy sessions. Because these conversations I have with you are the exact same conversations I have with my clients who pay me. So if you've been hesitant, if you've been a little bit skeptical, if you're someone that's thought that therapy is not going to help them, this is going to be the show that's going to be for you. And as a result, I want you to subscribe so that you can continue getting these same tips and gems that I give people who are, again, paying me hard-earned money for it. And as a result, you get these gems for absolutely nothing. So with that being said, I'm just going to go ahead and jump right into the first point. And that first point is that you have to learn how to help people with your heart more than your head when you start that whole grieving process. Now, I want to give you guys a story about the last time I went to my in-laws. And what happened was I saw one of my friends or a friend of the family member, they're speaking to my wife about their grief, right? About my wife's grief. And what was interesting is seeing them try to use logic to justify recreating a picture. So in my in-laws' place, right? So my father-in-law inside of his house, there's this big picture, this family portrait of all the kids, right? The family, everybody. And they're looking at this picture, and obviously it's tough because there's someone missing. And what they said was, hey, you guys should actually go and recreate this photo as a way to honor him. Now, in logic sense, right? In your mind, it sounds good. It sounds like a great idea. Maybe even something that I would say in therapy, right? Hey, like, how can you honor this person? But at this point, that piece of advice doesn't fit. And that's because they're using their head and not their heart. And it's the easiest thing to do because you're trying to help solve their grief. And that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to help them to be able to carry this grief, not make it go away. But again, how do you help them to carry this grief in a way that helps them to continue living life? So for me, that was a little frustrating to see. And I could see my wife getting a little frustrated hearing this person say that. So in my mind, I knew that she wasn't ready. And what she described to the person was that, again, she wasn't ready herself. So now you start to ask, well, what's the better way to help them during that time? Well, honestly, when I say, okay, you should probably use your heart, I'll also add that you should probably use your ears as well before you even start to think about using your head. Because at this stage, right, again, we're 6 months in, there's still a lot of processing. There's still a lot of whoa, right? Whoa in terms of, did this really happen? What does life look like now on Thanksgiving, Christmas, birthdays? It's just totally different. So during this time, we need to be a listening ear and not a problem solver. And ironically, when you stop solving problems, that's when you solve problems. Because right now we're trying to get through the whole feeling phase, the whole shock factor. And if you don't know the stages of grief, this first stage is where that whole denial phase sits in, right? You just can't believe it. So that's the first point that I want to make with you guys, right? You want to make sure that you're using your heart, then your head, right? And if you want to be more specific, use your heart, use your ears, and then use your head. Now, something that I saw that was shocking, right? Very shocking. And this is me moving into the second point. It was the day we found out that he passed away, right? Now, you may have seen this when everyone comes to the house. Everybody's bringing, food, they're bringing drinks, they're bringing everything, right? You don't even have to lift a finger, right? The only thing you have to do yourself is probably go to the bathroom, right? That's the only thing they're probably allowing you to do on your own. And what was crazy for me to see was the day after the funeral, right? The day after the funeral, everybody got back on their planes, everyone went back in their cars, everyone went back to their regular life as if nothing happened. And the next day when I walked inside the house, it was empty. I mean, empty. And when you start to realize that people tend to get on with their lives once the funeral and all that stuff, the condolences have been given, people tend to get back on with their life thinking that, hey, I've done my part. I was there with you when they're past. But if you know anything about grief, like I said in the beginning of this podcast, it is a lifelong thing. It's not something that you just put down whenever you want, but it's a scar that you carry for the rest of your life. And now the goal is to learn how to carry that scar. So in this point, what I want to talk about is that when you ask someone for help, right? Or when you tell someone to just let me know if you need help, trust me when I say they are so overwhelmed with emotions that they don't know what to say. And there's a good chance that they still, in the midst of their grief, do not want to be a burden. So as a result, they're not going to tell you what it is that they need from you. So what I want you to do is offer specific help. And if the person that's grieving doesn't give you anything, I want you just to find a way to help. Stop waiting to be told, stop waiting for permission, and just do it, right? Kind of like Nike, right? Just do it, right? And what you will see is that person will thank you for that in the midst of their grief, and probably once they're a little bit further out of that grief. Because right now, again, their world has been flipped upside down. So they're not thinking straight. They can't focus on eating. So how can they expect to tell you what it is that they need done around the house or with their family or whatever the case may be? So my goal for you in this step is to offer specific help. Because again, the day after that funeral and everybody's gone, it gets mighty quiet. And your loved one's going to thank you for being there once everyone has gone. Now, with that being said, this third and final point is going to be one that's spiritual. And I hope that's okay. Me and my listeners, they tend to be spiritual. Me, myself, I'm spiritual. If you're watching this, you see that I'm holding up a Bible. What's ironic about me doing this podcast right now is that I'm reading the entire Bible, right? That was my goal last year. I started off at the top of the year last year, and I'm still going through it. And right now, the book that I'm on is the book of Job. Now, the book of Job, if you know anything about him, man, he went through hell on earth. And I do not just mean that lightly. He lost everything. And then I think even throughout the story, at one point, I think his body was covered in boils and things like that. He was just going through it, even to the point where he cursed the day that he was born. Job was someone that a lot of us can relate to. You have lost everything, or maybe lost someone that you deeply, deeply admire. So now you're starting to question everything above you. And what I mean by that is God. You may think that whether it's God, and if you don't believe in God, you may think that the universe is out to get you, God is out to get you. And you start to ask these questions like, what did I do wrong? Did I offend someone? Did I curse God without knowing it? You start to think that there's something that you did that brought on all of this sadness, all this grief. And this is where someone can start to lose their faith in God. And what I want you to do in this part is I want you to normalize their spiritual struggles. I want you to take time to tell them that, hey, during this time, God knows that you're hurting. And even in the midst of this hurt, he has not abandoned you. And that's what it can feel like. And honestly, and it's kind of like if you ever had kids, you know what I mean by this. You could tell your kid to clean up their room, or you could tell them, no, you can't have ice cream. And then they'll get obscenely mad at you, right? They'll start crying, they'll start yelling at you. They may even come and hit you, right? But at the end of the day, you still love them, right? And I say that as someone who has a 3-year-old now. Believe it or not, God is just like that with us, where we can be upset with him, mad at him, all these different things. And he's still going to have that love for us the same way that we still have love for our kids, even in the midst of their temper tantrums. So during this time, I want you to pray for that person privately and with them if they allow it. And if you see opportunities to invite them to church, Bible study, and maybe during this time, they're not even leaving the house. And if so, you bring the church into the house, right? Whether it's church, synagogue, mosque, whatever it is that you practice. The way you could do that is by playing videos on YouTube from different sermons. You can ask the pastor or the priest or whoever to come into the house. And then also maybe there's certain members that attended your church, mosque, or temple that you can bring into the house as well to share and break bread with them. This is how you can help them to overcome that hurdle that people go through when it comes with their faith. and when life starts to hit. And ironically, that's another struggle that one of my clients are having this week. It's what do you do when life is hitting you hard and you are a believer of God, Christ, and you're praying, but you're not seeing anything come from those prayers, right? At least not in the moment, right? Not in the physical sense. What do you do? And that may be another topic that I do here in a little while. But normalize their spiritual struggles. And I also want you to pray for these guys during this tough time for them. And with that being said, what I want to do is I want to take a time to just repeat these points that I made. So when someone you love is grieving, one of the first things that you can do is focus on how you can help them with your heart, then your ears, and then your head, okay? The second thing is I want you guys to offer specific help. Trust me when I say that person that you love, they are so overwhelmed. And also there's a good chance they don't want to be a burden, that they're not going to be able to ask and tell you exactly what they need. So I want you just to be more assertive in that space. And then the last part, just like in the story of Job, I want you guys to normalize their spiritual struggles, because at this moment, everything's been turned upside down. And I wouldn't doubt that their faith may have been turned upside down in this moment as well. So with that being said, my name is Coach Wells. And again, this podcast's goal is to take you guys behind the scenes of what happens in actual therapy sessions. So if you ever thought about joining therapy, this is it. So with that being said, I'll see you guys later.